Hey guys, Tim here. I just want to let you know that this will be part one of a two-part series. Had to split it up. We went over 2 hours with Joel. It's an awesome episode, so I hope you enjoy. So let's tune right into part one of Joel from Fortress Canine talking all about protection dogs. Coming at you from East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Float, Odyssey, Telegram, and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is August 27th, 2022, and this is episode 161 of the Workshop Podcast. It's going to be a good one tonight. In just about 2 minutes, we'll have Joel on. We're going to talk all about dogs and puppies and why my dogs are bad dogs, and hopefully he can help me with that. But anyway, that's another story for another night. Real quick, we'll get the announcements out. Patch of the Month Club. You guys have heard me beat this. It's a dead horse, but this is the way to support the workshop. But if you want to make sure that you get in on the ground level and get the very first inaugural patch shipped out to you, get signed up by September 5th. Patchofthemonth.co. That's the way to go. And coming up on Friday at 11 a.m., we got a really special guest, William Fortune. He's coming on, the author of 1 Second After. It's a pretty big get for the workshop. I'm rather excited. And he is going to be on Friday, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, which is going to be great. Really excited. Can't wait. And today's tool is I did a segment for Jack on the Expert Council on Friday about the GOVEE freezer alarm. I have had probably 6 or 7 emails about that since. So if you're interested, I put the link in the description and in the podcast feed, so you will see it. So if anybody's looking for it, that is today's tool. So without further ado, let's bring Joel on. Hey, Joel, how are you, bud?
I'm doing great. How are you doing tonight?
Very, very good, actually. Yeah, I just got back from, we did a little 3-day vacation away with the fam. So that was fun. And I come home like a chicken with my head cut off and got everything put together with about 5 minutes to spare. So
that sounds like my life. I tell my wife all the time, you never run out of things to do. So don't stress that there's always more to do.
Ain't that the truth? Yes. When you don't have anything more to do, you're in trouble. Hey?
Yes.
So who is Joel? I've been wanting to have you on for a while. I'm pretty excited. If you follow me for any length of time, you'll know I'm a dog guy, but my dogs are a little smaller than yours. We have 6 Chihuahuas, but anyway, that's but yeah, tell me about, well, I know a little bit about you, but tell the workshop all about you, Joel. Where'd you come from? What was your first high school job? That's always my favorite.
So, coming out of high school, I actually was a busboy at Bennigan's, which I think they went out of business because I haven't seen one in a long time, but they were kind of like an Irish pub kind of a feel. And they had this thing where you could get like a tray of like 20. They were basically shot glasses with different beers in them. And then you could sample them and then pick the ones you wanted. They had all these beers on tap. And so I did that for a little while, did a couple other little jobs. I just found out I'm a terrible employee. But I went to work, or I went to college, and I was going through college, and I was like, this thing I'm getting this degree in college, I have zero interest in doing. Like,
What'd you take?
So I started off in physics, which I actually loved. And I'm very math oriented, like calculus and stuff like that is fun for me. Yep. But I walked into my first calculus class in college, and the professor walked in and said, read chapters 1 through 5, do all the homework. I'll see you tomorrow, and walked out. And I said, why am I paying to read a book and do it myself? And so I got up, I walked down to the office, I canceled those classes, and I changed my major. And I was undetermined, I guess, for a little while, and then decided to go education because I liked physical stuff. I had been racing for years, triathlon and stuff like that. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a PE teacher. And it just shows you how little I knew about what I wanted to do in life, that I'd go from possibly doing physics to doing PE. But 2 years in, I'm walking across campus, and I look up and see the ROTC building. And I was like, I always wanted to be in the Army when I was younger, and my parents kind of beat it out of me like, oh, no, that's scary. You don't want to do that. So I kind of was like, okay, fine. I guess I won't do it. And then I'm walking across this campus. I see the ROTC building. I walk inside, talk to a master sergeant, coolest guy I ever met. And he was like, well, here's the reality of being in the Army. And I'm like, well, that's exactly what I want to do. And he's like, well, you can sign here and we'll send you to basic training in 2 weeks. And I was like, done. So was going in as an officer, but still, because I didn't do my first 2 years in ROTC, had to do basic training to kind of catch up. And then I did my final 2 years of ROTC, commissioned as an officer, went in MP Corps, which I chose because I thought I would deploy less. And found out, no, MPs deploy more than just about any other branch, because when you're not deploying with a unit, you're deploying individually or doing various different things that you're kind of tasked out for. So did that for total between active and National Guard and Reserves, about 14 years. And then I was back on active duty, and it was time for me to leave a duty station. And I was finally a major at this point in the Army, right? And they were like, hey, when you make major, you actually get to start picking your locations that you go to. Like, they give you some choices, and you go, I want that one, and then you get to go where you want. So I was like all excited. I called branch, and I said, hey, I was just like looking for the options that we had. I know I'm going to be PCSing soon. That's permanent change of station, moving to another place. Okay. And so they sent me this list of like 16 places, and they said, put your top 3 choices in. So I actually picked Germany. I'd never been, overseas. So I picked Germany. I mean, I'd been deployed, but never like stationed over there. I picked, they actually had a Saudi Arabia for 1 year accompanied. I was like, that would be a great, like cultural experience for the children. So if I can bring my family, I'll do that. And I can't remember what the third one was. So, a couple weeks go by, and they come back and they're like, you're going to Kuwait for a year unaccompanied. And I was like, okay. So I found out, I can't remember how I did this, but I found out the guy who got the Saudi Arabia assignment, and I contacted him, and he was like, I don't want to go there. He's like, I'd rather go to Kuwait for a year. I'm like, well, I want to go where you're going for a year. So we both call branch, and they go, yeah, no, we're not moving you. And I went, okay, well, in that case, the needs of the Army, and which I understand, and the needs of me have gotten too far apart. Bye. And I dropped my paperwork and got out and never looked back. So did that, and then I tried to do the civilian thing for a while, right? I was a security guard at actually the Noah's Ark in Kentucky. Pretty cool place if you've never been. It's really cool. It's awesome. But I did security there for a little while. I did a National Guard AGR, but I understand now why the active duty calls them nasty girls, because they're really not the Army. They're a bunch of administrators. Like your soldiers that do the weekend thing, they do a lot more of that type of training, but the day-to-day function all through the week and everything, it's just one gigantic business. It runs just like any other bureaucracy. And I was the guy in the Army that my bosses always loved and hated at the same time, because if they gave me an assignment, I would always get it done. But if they told me to do something stupid, I would always say no. And so like I had a soldier one time, we were supposed to get our flu vaccines, right? And I had a soldier who had just had a baby girl, and they found a hole in her heart. And in Alaska, they don't have the ability to do that surgery up there. So what they do is they ship you down to Washington State, where they have much bigger medical facilities, and they pay for all your travel down there and everything. And then you get the surgery done, and then you come back. And so he's down there with his like newborn daughter that just had open heart surgery. And they're like, you need to call him and tell him to go get his flu shot at the nearest base, which is like an hour and a half drive for him each way. Right. And I was like, no, not doing it. And they were like, well, you're going to get in trouble if you don't. I'm like, then fire me. Like, if you don't like it, then you can fire me and put somebody else here that'll make him do that. And my first sergeant's like, no, sir, you can't do that. I'm like, I'm not fucking making that soldier go leave his newborn daughter and go down there and do that. So I would run into those kind of things quite frequently. But then anytime there was a big thing that needed to get done, of course, they were like, Ryals, get this done. And I was like, Roger, sir, we're on it. And it would get done. Right. So go ahead.
You were in. So was that still military when you were saying no?
Yeah.
And so not everybody can do that, right?
Well, there's definite risk to it.
Okay.
Right. So in theory, if it's a lawful order and you refuse, they could, in theory, up to court-martial you out of the military. Now, 9 times out of 10, if you do it when you shouldn't do it and you're making just bad choices and being a bad leader, they do what they call a relief for cause OER. So your OERs are your evaluation reports, and that's your anytime you have a change of your raters above, you'll get one, or every year you'll get one. And so if they think you're doing a really bad job, they give you a relief for cause OER, and they move you out of that position to some other position. And it's basically a career ender. So when you get to the point where you're ready for your next promotion, you don't get promoted, and they can even chapter you out of the military based on that. But if you perform and you're standing up for your soldiers, then even though they get mad at you and they yell at you, I used to say my butt's bubble gum, and but my sergeants would tell me that, sir, your butt's bubble gum again. I'm like, oh no, here I go. I'm going to get yelled at. See you in a few minutes. And I mean, that happened to me from lieutenant all the way through major. It was just one of those things. But I'm like, well, I must be doing something right because they haven't fired me from any jobs yet. I just get my butt chewed, and either I go, you know what, sir, that's right. You're right. I'm wrong. I'll go do it. But most of the time it was taking care of soldiers. It was not allowing stupid things to be done to just jerk them around all over the place. And even though I got yelled at for it, they never really did anything beyond that.
That's awesome. So we chatted a little before the show, and you've come through Alberta a few times, have you?
Yeah. So I used to live in Fairbanks, Alaska. And the very first time we went up, we took the ferry, which I will never do again. I do not do boats on big water. I get seasick and I just hate them. But I thought, oh, it's got stabilizers and it's big, so it's not going to be as bad. Well, the Alaska Bay in February, which is when we went up, is pretty choppy. I think there were like 16-foot seas that most of that trip. And so I just took Dramamine, slept, and threw up for that whole trip. And so I was like, nope, driving through Canada from now on. And when I would move my firearms, I'd usually fly down in advance with them all packed into Pelican cases, so I didn't have to go through the border with them. And then I just fly back and then drive down. So we made the trip. You mentioned you were in Edmonton just recently. So we've gone through Edmonton just about every time. We go from Edmonton up to, Dawson Creek. Mm-hmm. And then Dawson Creek splits off to the Alaskan Highway. And 2-lane, very potholed, pockmarked, not well-maintained highway. But, if you drive through that area, it's just absolutely gorgeous. If you see a red flag on the side of the road, slow down. That's a big bump. That's what that's telling you.
That took me a while to learn that. I come out here for about a year before I realized those little red markers meant something.
Yeah.
You hit them and, So you were up there in the cold. So how, in all this time, you spent quite a bit of time in the military. Where did your love or interest for dogs come from, your exposure to dogs, that kind of thing? Yeah,
so I got back from my first deployment in Afghanistan in 2003. It was actually my second deployment. I was at the Pentagon right after 9/11. I don't really consider that a deployment because it was in the States, but we left our base and we went to the Pentagon. And for 7 months, we did security because when all the airplane attacks and everything happened on September 11th, like 3/4 of the security just went, we didn't sign up for this, and left and never showed up again. So they brought in 4 MP companies. We were one of those. And then we did all the perimeter and interior security and the checkpoints and all that kind of stuff. So we did that. Then I went to Afghanistan. I came back from Afghanistan, and my now ex-wife, then wife, was like, hey, if you're going to be deployed like this, I get it. This is the Army. But I want a dog. I want a protection dog. So I didn't know anything about protection dogs. This is 2003 when I got into my first intro to dogs. And I started looking around, and everybody was Schützen, which is like a German kind of a sport. It was originally designed to test military and law enforcement dogs, but since it's just become like a sport that they do primarily. But everybody was like, these dogs are Schützen 3. They're the best dogs there are. So the parents are both Schützen 3. The puppies are going to be great. And all the pups were $3,000. All Schützen pups were $3,000. And I found this other place up in Canada, actually. And they were like, you can get our puppies for $1,500, and it's $1,500 to come train with us for a week. I was like, I get a week of training for the same price? Sold. And it just happened to be a massive blessing because they do things very differently than most of the rest of the dog training world. Most of the dog training world is kind of focused around the sports, and there's numerous different kinds. Some are a little better than others, but still generally they focus on things like they want the dogs to bite and hold in a certain spot. They want the dogs to do what they call a full mouth bite, which is essentially using their molars, which they do produce more power, more force when they do that, but they don't cause the muscular damage, right? Their canines are designed to tear and rip through muscle. And so I understand why a lot of that kind of stuff came into being, but I learned we train dogs that fight human beings, right? Because we're not training law enforcement dogs, and we're not training, if we do train military dogs, it's to fight and kill human beings. And so the idea was they use their canines. Their canines puncture the muscle. They rip and thrash and tear through it, and then they hit it again, and they do it again. And if you're fighting with them, they should be switching to the other arm and not allow themselves to be hit or stabbed or punched or anything like that. And so I didn't know anything else when I came in. This is just how I was brought up. And then later on, I found out this is how everybody else does everything. And so I feel really blessed there because we have a unique, not completely unique, but there's not very many people in the continent that do the way that we do. And I was blessed to have interacted with them and learned from them. And so
they were in Canada that you were learning?
They're over in Ontario. Yeah.
Okay. Are they still around? Do you know? Or
they are? Yep. There was a legal thing that happened, not anything terrible, but they made a change to the format of how their company ran, and they needed a no-compete clause to be signed, which many of us were already running our businesses and feeding our families with our businesses by that point.
Sure.
And so we said, or at least I said, can you guarantee me a certain amount of business every year? And they said, no, but we need you to sign this agreement. And I said, well, I can't in good conscience sign that agreement. I'm taking care of my family with this business. Like, unless you can guarantee me a certain amount of income in order for this non-compete to be in effect, then I can't sign the non-compete. And so we just agreed to go our separate ways. But part of it was I'm not allowed to mention them so supposedly I would be using their name to promote myself. So they're
cool.
just my friends in Canada.
Nice. It kind of blew me away that I just hadn't heard of the concept of protection dogs, up here north of the border. Right. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So where'd you go from there?
So I started training the dogs up there with them. We really connected. Some of the stories, if you've ever listened to Protection Dog Podcast, my podcast that I do every Thursday at 5 p.m., and it goes up on the actual podcast streams a week behind, but at like midnight. So it's there first thing in the morning on Thursday. And I started where I tell a story from my training up in Canada every time. And we did things. We were training in fire and water. We were literally being shot at as part of our training. Like we would have JTF2. Do you know who those guys are? So they're your version of like Delta Force.
Okay. All right.
So JTF2 guys, they have their own training facility and stuff like that. So but a lot of those guys would come and train dogs with us. So I had a lot of interaction with that community through that avenue. And so they would come down and they would literally have 22s and they'd be shooting like 10 feet in front of us as we're running back and forth with the dogs and teaching the dogs and us to deal with incoming gunfire. Right. But because they were the ones controlling the shots, we could trust that they weren't going to shoot us. And so we did, we were trapped in places with only like 6 inches of air between the water and the top of the thing with our dogs. And we had to figure out how to get out of it and all kinds of fun, crazy stories that we did up there. But I don't think they do much of that anymore just because of liability type things. But it was crazy. It was awesome. We really connected. They were like, come anytime you want, train with us as much as you want. Learned so much from those guys, have a true appreciation for everything that they did. And then they're still doing their thing and we're doing our thing now.
So what is a protection dog then? Maybe we'll start there. I'm kind of curious because, I kind of have an understanding of what a service dog is. And, growing up, lots of people had nasty ass old pit bulls in the backyard. Well, when I was growing up, it's mostly Dobermans, they'd typically be chained to a friggin' chain and barely fed, and you'd never want to climb their fence. And you figured if you ever got close to them, they might tear you to pieces, but you couldn't trust them around animals or people or other dogs. So what is that? What do you do? What makes you different? What makes what you do different?
Yeah. So we would refer to those kinds of dogs as something like a guard dog, right? Its job is to kind of create a sense of, hey, don't come in here. You're going to get hurt. For us, what a protection dog is it is a dog that is stable. That means it doesn't bite unless it's either told to bite by its handler or its handler is physically attacked. Those are the only 2 times when it's justified for the dog to put its teeth on any other person. And it has to be safe around other dogs. It has to be safe moving in public. It has to be safe around children and strangers and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a situation where we spend as much time or more time doing the stability side of it, which is we put a bunch of dogs on a table. We have dogs laying on top of dogs. our dogs come out to our public classes and they see all the other dogs that they're not familiar with. They see all the other people. And then depending on the training level, we take them out into public and do various different amounts of training in public with them, and getting them used to that kind of movement and exposure. And so when we look at the dogs in terms of the difference between what we do and what most other people that call their dogs protection dogs do, and not that those dogs wouldn't protect, but just in terms of differences and what, kind of our focus is, we train our dogs specifically to reverse in bite work. And that means if they're on one arm and I come up with a knife and I go to stab that dog, it should not allow me to stab it, right? It should see my arm coming, dodge out of the way, and then retarget on the arm that is now the threat to it. And so we call that reversing. Now, most of your dog training is based in one of the sport techniques. So either KNPV or IPO or Schutzen. There's a couple of others, but the general idea in almost all of those sports is the dog should go full mouth, meaning using their molars and bring their whole mouth in. They should bite and they should hold in that spot. Okay. And the rationale behind that, which most of the people that do the sports don't know the rationale, but the reason it was created that way is because law enforcement agencies were getting sued for dogs that were causing too much injury when they were being used on people. So the law enforcement agencies needed to minimize their risk of lawsuits. So they said, stop allowing these dogs to just move around and bite people wherever. They need to bite and hold on in one spot, create pain, but minimize the injury to that one location. And so they started training what they call the bite and hold. And my mentor used to call it the bite and die. And the bark and hold was the bark and die, right? You're getting close to the threat, but you're not able to incorporate yourself into that threat. Now they do different things, and it's not always that way. My mentor was a little skeptical of some of that stuff, but anytime the dog's not permitted to react to the threat from our perspective, it places the dog in unnecessary risk. And again, we said at the beginning, right? Our dogs are trained to fight human beings. They're not apprehension dogs. And that's really where it comes down to for law enforcement is their dog's primary purpose is apprehension. This guy is running away from us. You're faster than him, and he's faster than me. So go catch him for me, create some pain and hold him in place. I'll catch up as soon as I can, and I'm going to put handcuffs on him. And so that's the job of a police dog, right? That and like a lot of times they do drug detection and occasionally explosive detection. But drugs, they make money. The agencies make money finding drugs because there's almost always money in the vehicles associated with the drugs, and they get to keep it as they get to
spoils of war. I
mean,
anyway,
I can't think of it right now, but they
civil forfeiture, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
And so the idea of that dog's purpose being that, I understand, right? And when they use the dog as an apprehension dog, 9 times out of 10, that person's already demonstrated that they don't want the fight. They're either running away, right? So they're saying, I don't want to fight, I'm running away. Or they're hiding and they're used to detect either in like open fields or big buildings. Like if they run into a warehouse or something like that, the dogs will go in and search for the person. But people that are hiding and people that are running away are much less of a threat than someone who says, I don't care, I'm going to have the fight anyway. And so the 10 to 20 times a year that police canines are used on people like that, the police canines are almost always killed, because the person's willing to fight. And even though our dogs are pretty intense, one human that's willing to fight and that has any idea of how to fight versus one dog, and they're just left to do whatever happens, the person's probably killing the dog because we're a pinnacle predator. They're high up there. Now you're going to the ER afterwards. You may have permanent injuries to your arms, but just one versus one, human versus dog, and if the person is truly committed to the fight, they're probably winning that fight. No, that's why we get into 2 dogs and 3 dogs, and you'll see some of that at Self-Reliance Festival. We're doing multiple dog deployments where multiple dogs are deploying in together and fighting, and that totally changes the whole scenario because you can't focus on 2 dogs at once when they're coming at you from 2 different directions and things like that. But so a lot of these police dogs get killed every year because of this bite and hold, and then the person produces a weapon and either stabs the dog to death or draws a gun and shoots the dog. Or in some cases, they choke the dog out. If you grab a dog's collar and you twist your hand around, it hurts your hand, but it will choke the dog out. And a lot of these dogs won't release even in those situations. And even if they do release, if the person has some control over the dog, they can't get out of the choke once they're in it. And so depending on how much time the person has before the officer gets there, which sometimes is significant, some of these people will send the dogs in to like a wood line to find a person, and they'll be there for 5 or 10 minutes sometimes before the officer finally figures out where they are and gets there. So if the dog's not been trained to fight, which I understand why law enforcement agencies do it, but it puts the dog at risk, right? So we want our dogs to be able to handle those threats as best as possible, because in a protection situation, typically we as guys think, somebody attacks me, I'm going to deploy my dog, I'm going to kick their ass, right? Mm-hmm. And if I had to use my dog in a fight, 90% of the time, and most of my mentality would be, I'm going into the fight with the dog, right? But I'm not the only one using a protection dog. Most of our clients are females, and many of them have children, right? So if I had my kids with me and like, let's say 2 or 3 guys were like, starting to surround us and create a situation. If I deployed my dog in that situation, the first thing I'm doing is getting to my vehicle with my kids, getting them inside, cranking the vehicle up, backing out. Then I'll roll a window down, call my dog to me, and he can jump in the window and we're driving away, right? I'm not going to sit and fight even one guy with my children right there, where if he gets the upper hand, now all my children are at risk. Right. So you have a female, a lot of times it's the same thing. It's her primary job right now is to get her children to safety. So she deploys her dog and just runs away with the kids. And then hopefully she can get her dog back. It doesn't get seriously injured in the amount of time that it takes her to get somewhere. But so we want to give our dogs the highest chance of success in those scenarios. And the highest chance of success from our perspective is be able to fight this human being effectively, be able to counter the fight techniques that they use. So I often kind of joke at people that will see a dog, the person will go to strike a dog with a knife, for instance, right? And we have a training knife and we're trying to strike the dog with a knife. And the dog will jump back and it's watching the person, and the person moves and it darts to this side. And the person moves and it darts to this side. And it's waiting for that in that it can get in and hit again. And they'll go, oh man, that dog's weak. It's scared. It won't go in. And I'm like, yeah, because every MMA fight that you've ever seen, they just go bing and they run in and just start beating on each other, right? As fast as they can. No, that's not how any professional fighter fights. They come in, they will dodge and dart, and they'll try and elicit a movement from the other player or the other fighter to see how are they going to move, how are they going to react to this, so that they can then learn to counter, and then they start engaging with each other. And when Mike Tyson ducks out of the way of a punch from Evander Holyfield, they don't go, oh man, he was a pussy, he should have just taken it on the chin and then returned another one, right? It's like nobody looks at fighting that way anywhere else other than in the dog world. In the dog world, it's the dog should just come in, smash the person, hold on no matter what, and stay there. And I'm like, well, that's impressive in a sport. It's effective for a police dog in most situations. But if a person sees you walking with what appears to be a professionally trained dog, and they decide, I'm going to attack that person anyway, that person is a much higher level of threat than your average person, right? Your average threat is going to look around and go, they have a dog, find another target.
Right.
So if you have your dog with you and you're still targeted, the level of threat of that person is much, much higher than most police dogs are deployed on. And so the dog has to be able to deal with that threat and to actually engage that threat. And hopefully there's no guarantees, right? There's no guarantees in a fight.
Right.
People would often kind of when I was working with a Navy SEAL buddy, Rich Graham over at Full Spectrum Warrior, awesome guy. You should check him out if you guys want tactical training in Florida. But people would contact us and go, he would have like knife defense courses and things. And when they would contact you, their general, you could just feel it in the way they would ask the question was, can you teach me how to survive a knife fight and not get cut? And the answer is no. If you're in a knife fight, you're probably getting cut. Now, you're going to try not to get cut, but you should expect they just pulled out a knife. Now, I'm probably going to get cut, but I'm going to win anyway. Somebody pulls out a gun, I'm going to pull my gun or deploy my dog, or I'm going to fight back in some way, but there's a good chance I'm going to get shot. You know what? I'm going to win anyway. You get in a fist fight, you're getting punched or kicked or thrown on the ground. And you go into the fight, if you plan to win, with that's probably all going to happen to me. And I'm going to win anyway. So the idea is there's no guarantees. A bad fighter can have a great day and a good fighter can have a terrible day. And any of those things can happen to anybody at any point. But we stack the odds in our favor as best we can. And we stack the odds in the favor of the dog as best we can so that hopefully we come out with minimal damage and the threat is over. And then we can deal with the fight after the fight, the legal fight after that.
So funny you mentioned that, but I want to throw it here just so everybody knows. Are you good with answering questions toward the end, Joel?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. I got 3 starred already for you. We'll save them. We'll get to them at the end. So anybody has them, throw them out in the comments. And then Iridium, this fellow Canuck here, good guy. He says, excellent points. The fur missile is a civilian's exit strategy, not an attack weapon. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there may be a time in public when we have to deploy our dog, send our dog towards somebody. But I tell my clients this all the time. I say, you win every fight you don't have, right? Every fight you don't have, you won. If you can avoid a fight, if you can get away from a fight, you won that fight every time.
Yeah.
So because there's no guarantees, right? A good fighter can have a bad day and a bad fighter can have a good day. So we don't want the fight if we can possibly help it. So the only time two main scenarios I would envision actually deploying means sending the dog away from you toward a person to bite them.
Okay.
And so the only 2 places I envision that in public. So not in your home. If somebody's in your home, you would deploy your dog to wherever the person is in your home. But say you're in a parking lot, right? Is somebody's following you. Again, we try to avoid the fight. I recommend to my clients, we make 2 turns. Our second turn should take us back toward the building. And if they make a second turn and are following us back toward the building, now I'm engaging that person. Stop following me. Now, even if they were actually following you, they're probably going to try and disengage at that point. Oh, I'm just trying to get to my car. Then go over there, get away from me, right? But if they decide, you know what, we're in the middle of this parking lot. There's not a lot of people around. It's like dark, or it's in a, it's secluded enough that even with the yelling, it's not going to draw a lot of attention. I'm still going to come after this person. Stay back or you'll be bit. Do you understand me? And our dogs go on what we call a watch command. So they go to the end of the lead. Sometimes they'll bark. Sometimes they just are like, you freaking come in this lead. I'm going to smash you. And then if the person approaches, because I've already told them, stay back or you're going to get bit. Right now I've used my verbal and I've used a show of force with the dog. If they walk into that circle, they're getting bit.
Okay.
If they draw a weapon, I'm probably releasing the dog. So that would be the only in a like normal public scenario. That'd be one of the only times I would see deploying your dog is you give the verbal warning, you give the physical warning, assuming time and opportunity, right? Like if you turn around a corner and you see somebody draw a gun and point it at you, I'm probably just releasing the dog.
Sure.
Right? We're just going right to fighting mode. But that's not a normal situation. A normal situation is somebody's trying to kind of sneak up on you and you at least have the opportunity to engage, and it may escalate quickly, but if you're aware of your surroundings, the possibility of engaging prior to a conflict is pretty decent. And so that would be one scenario. Another scenario, and this is like kind of the extreme, is if they have your child and they are running away from you. If they have your child and they're running away from you, I'm sending my dog. And my dog is going to catch them and rip them up, and then I'm going to catch up to them. I'm probably going to stomp their skull, and then I'm going to take my child home. So in public settings, those are really your most likely, right? We could always come up with weird, crazy scenario. But so it's not an attack weapon. It's a defensive weapon. It's a don't come any closer or you'll be bit type of thing. And the nice thing is a lot of people in Canada, you guys have a lot of limitations on your ability to have firearms and other ways to defend you. So having the ability to have a canine that can do that kind of stuff is a huge benefit. And hopefully they won't catch on and start limiting your ability to have that. But I also recommend to my clients, don't advertise that you have a protection dog. Like don't walk around telling everybody, this is a protection dog. If you move with your dog at all, do it smart. If you have a legitimate need or a legitimate case for a service dog, then your protection dog can also be your service dog, assuming that it's truly stable and it's not a threat to anybody that you're moving around with. And I move with my dogs all the time. I take them out with me in public everywhere I go. And every dog that travels with me is a protection dog. But how many times have I had anybody bite or any of my dogs bite somebody? 0 times, because we do the training beforehand, right?
Chris
And
Dixon's he's an Albertan there. He said limitations, massive understatement about
I know.
But that's cool. I love this. Yeah, it's great, man.
Yeah. So that's the main difference in terms of what I consider a protection dog and kind of what we do. And I'm not the only one that does this, but there's only maybe about 6 or 8 of us in the country, and only 2 or 3 that I still keep in any kind of close contact with.
So as you got talking about this, is a question that kind of came up a little earlier as I was thinking. Now, of course, anytime you're in, so first off, could that protection dog be considered a deadly weapon?
It probably could be considered that. I think the best way to classify a protection dog is less than lethal. And that's how we kind of describe it or less lethal. And that's how they kind of describe even tasers and things like that in the U.S. now.
Yep.
Even a taser or a plastic shotgun round or rubber bullets can still sometimes kill people. So they refer to them as less lethal. They're probably not going to kill somebody. If you work multiple dogs, like let's say you have 3 dogs.
Sure.
And 3 trained protection dogs, and somebody comes onto your property and you're not there to call those 3 dogs off, they will probably kill that person. There's like a 90% chance that person's going to die. And we'll do a 3-dog deployment at Self-Reliance Festival. We'll film it. You can see it. Fighting. So I actually have a podcast called 1 Dog is Protection, 2 Dogs Are an Army, 3 Dogs Are Unstoppable. And you start doing 3+ dogs. The most dogs I've ever had biting me at one time were 12. And literally at that point, all you're doing is trying to stay on your feet. There's nothing you can do but just stay on your feet. And you've got dogs on your legs, pulling your legs, trying to take you to the ground. And when you deploy 3 dogs, even when you deploy 2 dogs, very frequently, one of them will start biting calves. And they just do it naturally. They could have never been a leg biter before, but you deploy them with another dog and they kind of look and go, oh, you got arms? All right, cool. I'm going to find something else. And they kind of will circle around once or twice. And then all of a sudden they go, bam, right on the back of your Achilles tendon. And they just start yanking. Right now, when you're wearing a bite suit, you plant that foot on the ground and you let them yank because you got a bite suit on. But when you have no protection and they grab your Achilles tendon and start yanking, you're giving that leg to that dog. And when you give that leg to that dog and you've got another dog pulling you another direction on one leg, the chances that you go to ground are really high. And I posted a video just recently on my Instagram and TikTok we had a new guy come and start learning how to be a canine sparring partner with us. That's what we call them. Most people call them decoys because they don't do anything. They just stand there and get bit. And but we're like, no, we're not decoys. We're canine sparring partners. We're teaching our dogs to fight. We spar together. So he came, he's learning, and very first day, very first deployment, he's like, I want to do those 2 dogs together, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, cool. Number 1 rule, always remember this, don't go to ground. Stay on your feet, no matter what happens. We deploy these 2 dogs, 3 seconds in, he's on the ground. And thankfully, we have good control over our dogs. Out, let's go. They immediately, one of my dogs, literally, this is his head. One of my dogs literally was like this. And I said, out. And he went, oh, man. And kind of came back to me. And he's like, I felt it. He was right there. And I'm like, yeah, I saw his canines right there when I said out. And he went, and came back to me. So they take you to ground and they start targeting neck and head. And so the only time we go to ground with our dogs is when our dogs are wearing muzzles, because now they have the protection, right? Sure. I can take the protection off. I don't wear a suit. Now they're not seeing a suit to target on. And they're seeing a human, and then they're having to fight that human with the muzzle. But I hope that answered that question there.
Mike from Snail Creek asked if Tim could wear the dog suit at Self-Reliance. I don't think I have any training for that. The problem I run into is I'm only 5'9", about 180. Right. So I keep having these guys that come and train with me that are like 6 foot tall. And I'm like, I don't have any bite suits that fit you. That's exactly. I was going to say, I bet you don't.
And so, like, I have one dude training with me right now. He's a really cool guy, Cisco, and he's like 6 foot tall, maybe 6'1". He's right in that range, but he's thin, so he can put my suits on. But I literally had to buy him hand gauntlets, which are these leather covered because his hands stick out of the sleeves, And if your hands are, my dogs bite hands. Like that's one of the things they target. And that's one of the things that I find funny, that people will say, oh, those dogs are biting hands. They're weak. They have weak nerves. I'm like, where's the last place you want to get bit?
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe you say my face, but the next one before that is, I don't want to get bit here. What's the threat of a human? If you take these away,
right
there, what can you do to me if I've taken these away from you?
You can't, no padding.
You can't hold a weapon.
Yeah.
You can't do anything to me if your hands are destroyed by a dog biting them, right? And so, but his hands are sticking out. So I have these gauntlets on, right? I give him these gauntlets to wear. And but there's this little, if he's not careful, a little gap at his wrist will start to open up, right? And so I'm always watching. And my dogs, like most of my suits are either tan or brown or something like that. So these black leather gauntlets at the end look like they've got something in their hand. So my dogs target them specifically. And they're hitting them, and I'm watching. And as soon as that sleeve slips back a little bit, I'm like, out, let's go. And just to make sure he stays safe, right? Like he's gotten pretty good at figuring it out and keeping his hands there. And I just recently got a jacket that has black sleeves, so it kind of blends together. And amazingly, they bite much more naturally on him and don't specifically target his hands because it all blends together as one thing. It doesn't like stand out that at the end of his hand is this weird thing that the dogs aren't used to.
So I'm sure this is a state to state thing, but you had mentioned liability earlier, and that was top of mind for me. So a couple things here. I mean, number one, if it's, a little old lady or somebody who has your dog, and I assume you've had people call you after the fact where they've been protected by your dogs at this point.
So I've had a lot of people contact me where dogs have kept a situation from happening. Either my wife and kids were traveling and this weird, crazy guy approached my wife and she pulled the dog out and he immediately turned and left. Right.
Nice.
I get a lot of those. Our dogs apparently are such a deterrent that no one has ever had to actually use them.
Sweet.
And so like, it would be really cool to say, yeah, man, my dog tore this person up and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, we have sold over in about 12 to 14 years, I've sold about 160 to 180 trained dogs. And
Wow.
I've had 0 people need to use them. And most of that is because the dog is such a deterrent. And when you walk in public with a dog that's pulling at the end of the lead, like you go to Pet Stupid, right? PetSmart. And you're walking in there and you bring your dog there, and 90% of the people walking in there are getting dragged down the rows by their dogs, or at least the dog's just roaming at the end of the lead, right? It's just doing its own thing, blah, blah. You see that person in public, you're not thinking, that's a trained dog, I'm not going to mess with that person. You're thinking, that's a stupid dog, it might bark at me, but it's probably just going to run away if I yell at it, and I can do whatever I want to that person. When you get a dog that moves like our dogs move, at your side, keeping an eye on the environment, looking at threats, alerting on them for you, and telling you there's a threat there, and you go, I see it, leave it alone. And you become more aware of your surroundings, and people just look at you and go, I don't want to mess with that person.
Huh.
And now you can do that with a highly obedience trained dog, but I always go, is it worth it to you to carry a gun with no ammunition? If I carry a gun and I pull it and draw that gun and point it at somebody and they go, you're not going to fucking shoot me. And they start walking forward and all I can do is go click. Is that a situation I want to be in? Or 9 times out of 10, I go, nope. And nobody should think that way, right? They should think if I carry a gun, it needs to be loaded. And so that's why we do what we do with the dogs.
So what about liability? Do you think is, because obviously like after incident with firearms and that sort of thing, obviously there's a liability there. Have you looked into it at all, or is there, what do you think?
So I say, number one, if you defend yourself with anything, you're probably, or there's a good chance you're going to have a legal fight afterwards.
Sure.
Especially if you win the fight, right? If you win the fight and let's say you break, Bubba's arm who was attacking you, his family's always going to say, he was a good boy and he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. And this mean person broke his arm, right? There's always going to be some sob story, blah, blah, blah. Because the people that do that kind of stuff are dirtbags and their families are probably dirtbags too. And that's the kind of things that dirtbags do, is they want to blame everybody else when they create a problem, and especially when it doesn't go well for them, right? So you have to prepare yourself that if you ever have to defend yourself at all, there's going to be a fight after the fight, the legal fight. So we want to do a couple things. We want to set ourselves up for success as much as we can on the front end. And then we just acknowledge that something is probably, or at least likely may happen on the back end. And then there's a few things we can do about that too. So on the front end is, I was in the Army, but I was also a sheriff's deputy for 6 years. That was one of the things I tried to do in the bureaucracy. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this crap. And I left. But we can talk about law enforcement at another time. So one of the things they taught us going through the police academy was whenever you're arresting someone, no matter what they're doing, you always say over and over again very loudly, stop resisting, stop resisting. And they actually went into, why are we teaching you to say out loudly, stop resisting? The reason we say that to you is because there will be people around, and most of them won't see what's actually happening. But you know what they think was happening? Yep. He was resisting. You know what they will tell under oath what was happening? They will say, well, they kept saying stop resisting, but he just kept resisting. Why do they say that? Because you planted that in their mind that that's what was happening. They only heard it. They didn't see it, but they will testify to it. So when we deploy our dogs, the first thing I tell my clients to start saying is, stop fighting the dog and I'll call them off. Stop fighting the dog and I'll call them off. Now, if the person keeps fighting, the dog keeps fighting, right? If the person stops fighting, we immediately call our dogs off. And so those are the things you can do in advance, right? I want a dog that recalls quickly. I don't want a dog that the person goes, okay, I give up. And the dog just keeps thrashing them. And you see a lot of these police videos where that happens, right? The police officer comes in and he's trying to get the dog off the person. The dog's just ripping the person up because he won't release. I'm like, to me, that's 100% unacceptable. Sure. You call a dog out, the dog releases, and it comes to you. Now, sometimes, dogs have a lot of the same stress reactors that we have. So they get auditory exclusion. They get tunnel vision, depending on how often they've been in the fight scenarios and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes you go, out, fooey it out, let's go. And that second fooey it out, they're like, oh, sorry, boss. And they come right back in, right? But you're talking about a quarter of a second delay between the out and the fooey that out, let's go. And my dog comes back to me. So on the front end, I want my dog to release as soon as I say, and truly in my heart, I want the dog to cause as little damage as possible to get the desired result, which is the threat ends. If you carry a gun and your mentality is, if somebody threatens me, I'm going to kill them, you probably have some mental problems. And there are a lot of people carrying guns that have mental problems, which is a lot of what the liberals use to try and limit people's ability to have guns. Because a lot of people that carry them, that's what they think. They think somebody steals my TV and runs down the road, I'm shooting them. Well, you're a murderer then, because the TV is not worth a person's life. Now, if they're carrying a TV, you know what I can do? I can probably run faster than they can carrying my TV. And I'm totally good with running up behind them and pushing them from behind while they're carrying my TV, and they fall on the ground. Now, if they get up and fight, then it's a different story. But if they're just running away with my TV, I'm not going to shoot them in the back. If they're running away with your child and you knew 100% that you could shoot them without harming your child, which is where a dog would be great, then maybe, right? But we don't just, the mentality should never be, if somebody does something bad to me, I'm going to kill them. That the people that think that way either have not thought about it very much or truly have a mental disorder. So we truly do want our dogs to cause the least amount of damage to get the desired result. And that means as soon as they start creating pain, if that person's like, I give up, out, let's go. Get on the ground, face away from me, put your hands out to your sides, palms up where I can see what's in your hands, cross your legs. Now they have to do multiple things to be able to get back up. Right? If you move again, you will be bit. Do you understand me? Call 911. So now I've taken control of the situation, but I cause minimal damage to the person. And so if he goes into a court and says, this crazy dog attacked me, well, now I have all these witnesses that will say, well, he kept fighting the dog. Why do they say that? Because I said, stop fighting the dog and I'll call him off. And the minute he actually stopped fighting, my dog's outed and came back to me. And so we have all the pre stuff where we set ourselves up for success as much as possible. Again, we're also doing the avoiding the fight if possible, because we win every fight we don't have, right? But assuming that it gets to the point where there's an actual fight. And then on the backside, my recommendation to people is this: sign up with somebody like U.S. Law Shield. So U.S. Law Shield is a group you can sign up for. It's like $120 a year. And I think you can add your spouse for like $30. So for like $150 a year, you get a legal insurance policy that says if you have to defend yourself with anything, and they were at prepper camp last year when we were there, and we specifically asked them, if someone uses a dog to defend themselves, will you represent them in court under your program? They're like, we will represent you in court if you use a toaster, a frying pan, a knife, a dog. We don't care what you had to use. We just care that you had to defend yourself in a violent situation, and now you're being sued. We will represent you. So it's not a guarantee, but now the up to $15,000 or $20,000 of expense that you may have had to deal with to defend yourself after defending yourself, you were attacked by somebody else. Now at least that expense is deferred. It's covered by this $120 to $150 a year insurance policy with U.S. Law Shield. And I'm sure there's a few others out there. They're just the one I'm familiar with. I don't have any association or affiliation with them. I just know that they exist, and I think it's a good idea for people to have something like that, whether you have a dog or not. If you think that you may ever have to defend yourself, that is an amazing insurance policy to have to cover yourself. And they even have things that they're little add-ons. They're like $10 and $20 add-ons each year, but they have ones for like, if your kid is bullied in school and has to defend themselves against a bully, they'll come and defend you at the school board meeting.
Oh, wow.
That sort of thing. So they have a lot of different options in there. It's really something I'd encourage people to look into. And I plan to sign my family up for it pretty shortly.
That's cool. So, yeah. Preventative. First off, like you said, I mean, yes. most threats are eliminated before anything with a properly trained dog, it sounds like. And then you mentioned reasonable force, enough force to de-escalate or stop the situation. Hey,
right. And so if you follow our proceedings that we teach people, so first we make our turns, assuming time and opportunity, right? You're not ambushed and attacked immediately. Someone's following you. It's a dark parking lot. There's nobody else around. You feel uncomfortable. I turn between cars. Now, people do, especially if they're on a phone or something and they see you turn and they look up and go, oh, my car's over there. If their car is in the direction that you turn, they will have a tendency to turn down the same set of cars that you did. We have this tendency to follow each other. And that's why I go, if they follow me through the cars, I make a second turn, but now I'm heading back toward the building. Because if they follow me back toward the building, that's really suspicious, right? And if they come out and go the other way or go straight across to another lane, they're looking for their car. But if they turn and follow me, at the very least, I have a pretty good justification to verbally engage that person. Stop following me. Then if you come any closer, you will be bit. Do you understand? Dogs on watch. If they approach you, now I gave verbal warning. I gave a show of force. I did everything I could to make sure that this person didn't get hurt and they continued to approach in a threatening manner. And then, of course, if they draw a weapon, I did everything I could up until the moment that they drew a weapon. And then I was forced to release my dog because they presented deadly force to me. And even then, I had the justification of drawing a gun, depending on where you live. And if you did have that justification, I had the possibility of drawing a gun and shooting them. And I didn't do it because I truly don't want to harm a person if I can help it. And so if you follow that kind of approach in the beginning with something like U.S. Law Shield on the end, that's your best bet, right? I know you're familiar with Jack, and a lot of times Jack talks about, how he would solve problems, and people always want to come up with, well, there's this possible thing. He's like, well, that possible thing is here now. So you can't use a possible problem that could exist, that already exists, to justify not doing a thing. And so if you use a gun, you're probably getting sued. If you use a knife to defend yourself, you're probably getting sued. If you're big and strong and you break a guy's arm defending yourself, you're probably getting sued. Well, if you have a dog and that's also the case, that's the case if you defend yourself at all.
True.
So to me, where the possible issue comes up with liability is if you have an unstable dog. You have a dog that bites somebody when they should not have bitten. And so that's why we put such an emphasis on the stability of the dog, being able to be around people and other dogs and all this kind of stuff, and not be aggressive unless I tell you to be aggressive or I'm physically attacked. Those are the only two times you're allowed to break obedience. Or, well, one is obedience. I sent you to deploy. But if somebody attacks me, that's the only time you can break obedience and defend me, because then I'm physically being attacked. And if your dog is truly stable, then it's not that there's zero risk of liability, but there's substantially less risk of liability. But if you carry concealed, you have a substantially higher liability than if you don't carry a gun at all, right? If somebody gets a hold of your gun and uses it on somebody else, that's a lot of liability on you. To me, that's way more liability than moving in public with a 99.9999% safe dog.
So here's something. I'm just say you were concealed carried, but you also had your dog with you, and you deployed your dog instead of your concealed carry. That might actually be a point in your favor if you did go to court, considering at that point it might be considered less than lethal, even if
I would think so. The thing that you have to always remember in court is you have a jury of your peers, and they're all stupid.
True.
And so emotions are easy to manipulate. And so there's just like in any other fight, there's never a guarantee. We just stack the odds in our favor as best we can. I do think it would be a benefit to be able to say, I had this ability and I did not use it. I used a less dangerous capability to defend myself. But of course, at the end of the day, you always have to convince 12 or 6 or 12 people that you were right and the other person was wrong. So again, being able to produce a minimal damage to get the desired result would also go a long way in that situation, where the person, says, okay, get him off. And your dog actually outs and comes back to you in a very quick time frame, and minimizes that damage. And the person's not maimed for life. Now, if the person continues to fight, well, then they continue to fight. Right. And they have to deal with the consequences of that. That's why, as a general rule, my policy is I'm joining the fight with my dog.
Oh, okay.
It's part of it is I don't want my dog to fight alone, but part of it is too, me and my dog together can end the fight a lot faster than just my dog by themselves.
Sure.
If my dog engages somebody, they typically hit one or the other arm, and unless the person presents a weapon or starts hitting the dog, they're probably not reversing. Well, if I go in with my dog, whichever arm the dog gets, because they're getting there first, I focus on the other arm. I immobilize that arm. Now he can't use that arm to fight my dog, and then I can use that arm to drive him to the ground. Out, Plutz. Do not move or you'll be bit. Do you understand? And I can end the fight a lot faster than if I'm just standing there yelling at the person. Because that person, I have to understand as the person dealing with the situation, that if I deploy a dog on somebody, that person is probably going to their peak stress threshold. They are shutting down in terms of they're experiencing all of the cognitive and physiological stress factors. They're getting tunnel vision. They're getting auditory exclusion. They're getting probably fast motion time, which is the worst thing that can happen in a fight. So basically, you don't know what to do, and in your mind, it all just happens so fast. I don't know what happened. And as opposed to slow motion time, which is someone who's been trained to deal with stress, and for them, time actually slows down, and they can see things and adjust and react in what seems like superhuman speed because their brain is slowed time down for them, and they're able to process faster. But so this person is probably going through all of these things, and so when I'm saying stop fighting the dog and I'll call him off, there's a very good possibility they don't hear me at all.
Fair enough.
And so it's better for them if I can go into the fight with my dog and gain control of that person and put them in a non-threatening situation, like laying down on the ground face down, call my dog off. Now I've helped them. They may not think so right at this second,